Hello, everyone, and welcome to my now weekly content UX audits. I'm not sure why I decided to do that the day after the US presidential election, but here we are. Um, to switch it, I mean, from being every other week to every week. So I am just checking my technical setup, making sure it's streaming. I've had some like weird issues in the past where it wasn't going on LinkedIn, and for some reason, I don't know that it's actually doing that now. I'm seeing some people are tuning in, so it's definitely streaming somewhere. But I guess I may not have solved that technical issue for this stream. Oh, no, actually, it looks like it's working. Okay, cool. Um, all right, for those that are here live or are checking out this after the fact, okay, I may drop the LinkedIn recording now because I'm getting an error, which is just lovely. Okay. Anyway, for whoever this is working for, you can use this link at the bottom of the screen, that blogsmith.tips/content UX, to submit your own content for a future audit. And I'm just double checking. I think it's still not working, unfortunately. But anyway, today I wanted to focus on a brand. It's a brand that I use. And it is a brand that I think does really excellent work with content. They create really great content experiences across a bunch of different types of assets. Today I'm focusing on their blog specifically. So let's go ahead and change the screen here so that you can see what I'm talking about. So the brand is Apollo. Apollo offers various like sales intelligence tools and also tools for like outbound sales to support those different activities. So again, this is a tool that we use at the Blogsmith, and they've just been like really making waves this year. And now the YouTube recording went out, so this is going to be 100% recorded, I guess. All right, well that's cool. So anyway, Apollo is I've kind of given you the background. Sorry, I'm just distracted by the technical issues. But I'll go ahead and just get ready for the recording side of things here. So anyway, this is their blog. Let's start with just kind of like this hero image area and like what's working really well with it. So I think they do a really good job with headings and titles in general. This isn't probably the best example. There were some other blog posts that I was looking at, and I ultimately picked this one because I just thought it was, fairly representative of approach in general, and it was something that also spoke to me in terms of just like featuring the product itself. But even that being said, I think that this title is still good because it's kind of like sharing what they're going to go over and then like the end result. I think there's a lot to that. And what's really great about Apollo and like anything that they write about sales is that they can very easily connect it back to their tool because their tool has a lot of different use cases. It kind of like connects the dots between different parts of the sales process. So it's just like anything that they want to write about sales is probably going to be a great way to support their tool, because it directly relates, and you'll see that as I go through. The other thing I really like about this content experience on their blog, which they call a magazine, by the way, which I think is interesting, and I think that it's a fair label because when I look through, it kind of invokes that sense of like a glossy magazine that like you're reading for entertainment, but also in this case, you're entertained while you're learning something valuable. And they really do a lot, and you'll see it in this article, to like connect with subject matter experts to like make sure that they're like a big part of the content that they create. They're not creating this in a silo. They are really like, engaging with the people who actually use these tools or who could use these tools in order to create useful stuff for the rest of us. But what I was going to say is I really like how they have like a short excerpt. That's pretty common with their articles. It's interesting to me. Don't know if I like this or not. It says when the article was last updated, but it doesn't say when it was originally published. So that could be useful context. But at least we get a date in general. I think that that's something that Google wants to see. They want to be able to understand how fresh the content is. And it does seem that Apollo, definitely stays on top of their articles and keeping them updated. Although I guess it's hard to kind of benchmark without seeing when it was originally published. I like this little share widget. Although it's like the sort of like branding of Apollo is just so present in all these different elements. It's very distinctive, and I think that it's like this distinctiveness that's really important for brands of any type moving forward, to kind of like stand out amongst this like world of AI content homogenization. That's something that is definitely a real problem and is happening right now. And I think that it's kind of like early to see like what the effects of that are on brand. And again, I think that's where having a very distinct approach in your content can only help you moving forward, as people crave that human connection in the face of all this like AI generated nonsense, including things like comments on LinkedIn that are like 100% AI generated. The one note that I had for just this like header area, and it's kind of for the content in general, is like, from what I can tell, because I've been like looking at some of their blog posts to prepare for this, is that Carly Stone is probably like one of their staff writers. She's in a lot of these different sections and things like that, but we don't get that context here. We just have her name, and just, sorry to like Blair Witch Project, but if we scroll to the bottom, there's no author box. I really do think that like the future of content, and especially content that ranks in relevant search, but really like content that humans want to read, it's like they want to understand what your relation is to the topic, your subject matter expertise. And so having an author bio that sort of like addresses that and answers those questions is really important. All right, I guess like one other comment about just like the content experience in general. This hero section area is taking up a lot of space. I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. What I might suggest is like, is there a way to kind of like cut the margins a bit? Maybe even also like scale down the featured images. That's just a thought. I don't know how important that is, especially if it's kind of like this, magazine feel where it's like we're kind of merchandising the article before you get into it. And so that's like a fair reason to take this space. But I'm just throwing that out there. One thing that I noticed too was that this article doesn't have any sort of like table of contents, and it is a lengthy article. We go into some like basics of cold calling, we get into these scripts, and then at the very end there are some best practices and some tips and things like that, and just like further knowledge that you could dive into if you want. So it is like a pretty lengthy article. It's not the longest article in the world, but there are these at least like 3 sort of distinct sections, areas of the article. And so my recommendation would be to add a table of contents, and whether that's clickable links or not, whether that's kind of in the center of the page or at the sidebar, but just something that sort of sets expectations, like here's where we're going to go from here. You could maybe make the argument that the title is kind of setting expectations, but it doesn't, it sets expectations for the scripts, but not necessarily like the tips and like the context around it. So I wanted to address these types of sections that say like, what is, dot, dot, dot. It's definitely a keyword play. It might be kind of like a FAQ sort of play in a sense, like just to kind of like, people reading this article might have this question: what is a cold call? What is, whatever like the baseline topic is. That's totally fair. I think that people in general are encouraging against these kinds of sections, and my take on this is not that you shouldn't have them, but I think that you have to kind of like finish the thought and like connect it back to the topic. So like, it's like, what is a cold call in terms of this topic that is about cold calling scripts and booking meetings? Like, how does a cold call, I guess, like get you to meetings? or like, what do you need to know about cold calling to sort of like develop your scripts or something like that. It's not the perfect example or like way to explain it. But what I'm trying to say, or like the guidance I'm trying to give, is to put that what is, 101 topic question into the context of the specific article. And then I think that sort of solves for the people who might question, like, why is it here and why are we, spending this much space on it, right? Okay, so one thing that I noticed about a couple Apollo articles that I looked at, and this is like so not unique to them. This is just like a thing that I'm gonna like a soapbox to get on in general for content marketing. It's just like when you include stats, I think it's really important to also put those into context. So like the stats here, only 27% of sales reps believe that cold calling is an effective first step in sales outreach. 82% say they've accepted a meeting with a salesperson after a series of touch points. I want to just like do a little, thought experiment here and kind of like trace back these stats. So both of them are coming from this article here, Small Biz Genius. It was published, early February. And this is one of those stats. This was the second stat. I actually don't see like where that came from here. So that's a problem that I can't tell where it came from. As we look into the article, maybe this is it actually. As we look into the article, we see that there are different sources listed, but they're not linked to. And then furthermore, of the ones that are mentioned, there are some benchmarks here. For example, 69% of buyers report they accepted one or more cold calls in 2019. I have this sort of just like thought about marketing and business in general, which is that pretty much anything that happened pre-pandemic is almost like not useful for sort of like judging buyer behavior now, because things just fundamentally changed after the world shut down and businesses had to adjust, and we're still adjusting in a sense, but the bigger like point here is not so much about the pandemic in general or how that affects buying decisions. It's about the fact that like many stats, industry dependent, sort of become outdated as of if they're like a year or two old, if they're older than that, especially in digital marketing. And I would say that sales is a related thing. Sales, there's a lot of sort of like traditional approaches that work, and there are some that like, people at least claim that they don't work anymore. And so it's just like with any other industry, there's this back and forth of the traditional approach versus, the new age approach and things like that. I think Apollo is definitely like bridging the gap between both of them. But as far as stats in this particular article, they are suspect because I can't trace them back to their original source. With a link at least they named, the group here for that one stat. There's also not like a benchmark. When you say something like 82% of buyers, that sounds like everyone who's a buyer, in the world, right? But it's like, is this for a specific geographical territory? When did you get this data? Was it a survey? Can you describe who conducted that survey, like the methodologies for it? So like, if we're going back here, like what would be the ideal way to present this stat? If they had said like a survey of, X number of buyers by, certain publication who gathered this data found that 82% of buyers, and then we linked back not to this article, but to the original source from the Rain Group. Because also like what's the Rain Group's like, tied to this, right? Like by linking back to the original source, I can investigate that for myself. And I'm also hoping that like the content writer is doing like their own preliminary, like just due diligence with the sources that they're getting stats from, because Rain Group, I just don't know what they do. If they're not like super related to sales, then that also kind of like dims like the point here, like it dims the usefulness of it, if that makes sense. Okay, so that was my soapbox for stats for today. I I do talk about this too in my book, Writing for Humans and Robots and New Rules of Content Style. I have a chapter about like fact finding and fact checking and things like that. So if you're interested in more about like how to create a process around that versus like, just like following your feels, then you might enjoy that. Okay, so this section here I thought would be like a really cool infographic. I think that that's one way to make this information a little bit more visually interesting. We definitely get like a ton of visuals like as we start to get into these next sections between the call scripts themselves, and I like how they've merchandised them here so it's not just plain text, but also like some of the examples that they give at the end, some tips, some ways to use Apollo, things like that. But up until that point, it's just kind of like text, for a couple scrolls. We have like 3 sections that are just text after the hero image. So just like a very simple infographic, the sort of like title, the description, maybe even like a short version of the description, and some sort of icon. Maybe they're in order, maybe they're not. Because this is kind of talking about these are like the elements of a successful cold calling script, so they don't necessarily have to be in a certain order, I don't think. But yeah, I just think that would be one way to sort of like visually move this and make it interesting. And you could do that in addition to the text. And then it also creates kind of like a nice shareable graphic too, and potentially something that like other brands will link back to. So that's like always the thing I think with images is you think about them not as just like, I think like primarily think about them as being useful for creating a great like content experience, but also think about how it can support your other channels, your other goals, and just getting the content in front of more relevant people. Visuals are a great way to do that. So now we get to the script examples. There are several here. They each are kind of presented in a similar manner with this visual. It's easily labeled, it's easy to follow along, it's short and sweet. And then in each case, we have kind of like a subject matter expert who provided this script, a little bit of context about them, or, some like insider detail about why they're using it this way. So with that being said, what did I want to say about the script examples? The fact that we have subject matter experts who have contributed here, I think it would humanize things more to maybe add like a headshot. You could add it like on this script visual, just have like a little headshot in the corner, their name, maybe the like role and company too, because in this case Manny is from Apollo, but then the next example, Charlotte is a sales coach. And I believe that she probably, works outside of Apollo, just based on how this is written. I haven't investigated that. So something like that could be cool. Another comment that I had was most of these sections, not the first one, but most of the remaining ones have these kind of like CTAs that it's kind of like related to the article, but it's also like trying to drive people to another related article. So like that. We also have this one specifically like bringing it to Apollo Academy. Here's another similar one. They all have kind of like a variation on this. What's kind of interesting is that they're not necessarily consistent in terms of their styling. This one's italicized, this one isn't. So that's a little bit confusing of a reader experience to just have kind of like different styles. The other thing that I was going to say is I think this is an opportunity to maybe like also drive more attention to these things, and that kind of depends on like what's the goal with including them here. Are we just trying to like add internal and external links? Like this one actually, they're all internal links, I think. Are we just trying to kind of like weave in internal links, or do we want people to really go here? Because in terms of all this other styling that's going on, it kind of gets lost. It's kind of stuck between this big block quote and this next section with this image. It's easy to kind of like lose or to like skip over it with your eyes. So I would suggest maybe adding like a highlight or a bold emphasis, or something that I also do if it's like a link is like add little carrots like that to make it kind of look like a link, and then you could like bold it. And then underline it if it's a link for access issues and things like that. But that's kind of a minor note, but something that could be useful. But it really depends on what the goal is. If it's not the goal to like draw attention to these and get people to click them, then I would try to weave it into like the bigger section, and instead of kind of pulling it out and separate and making it seem like it's a separate thing, if that makes sense. Okay. One comment that I have in general, and I'll take this opportunity to reference the Blogsmith style guide, which you can go to the Blogsmith website under resources, content style guide, or you can go to blogsmith.com, theblogsmith.com/content-style-guide. You can download it, you can access it, use it as your baseline, kind of like AP style, but for writing for the web. Anyway, on the Blogsmith style guide, I believe one of the things that we talk about is formatting, and I personally do not like when formatting extends to punctuation, especially like the end of like a call to action, for example. Another thing that I'm just thinking of now too is we also have some guidance in the style guide about link anchor text, and specifically my guideline, my rule of thumb is that you shouldn't link more than like 5 words, because it's kind of like more for Google to make sense of. And it's kind of a bad reader experience too, to have to read that whole text underlined versus like calling attention to, like probably what it should have said is like, check out the Apollo Academy for Anthony's full guide to cold calling. And maybe they could say, maybe they could have hyperlink full guide to cold calling or something like that versus this whole thing. So that's a personal thing, but see how it's like it's really about consistency is like what I'm trying to nail down here. This one does not have that same issue as this one, or whether you see it as an issue or not, it's just that it's inconsistent. And that's an easy thing to be inconsistent about if you don't have a style rule defined that everybody's operating off of. Okay, so then we get to like the tips, and this is where it really becomes about Apollo. We have featured Apollo throughout in terms of the people who work at Apollo, who've created like these educational resources, who help set some sales strategy. Anthony actually may not be part of Apollo, but he's contributed to the Apollo Academy, so he's a part of Apollo in that regard. We have Manny up here, who's a sales rep. So they've done a really good job of featuring their product already and featuring their people, which I think is also really important. As we get to kind of the bottom here, but this is kind of like really where it becomes like the product-led content, where we're directly relating how you can find cold calling success to using a tool like Apollo and using it, for different parts of your process. So, there's at least like 2-3 different tools mentioned here within Apollo, in addition to the resources that we've already gone over. Other, blogs that they've linked to that are relevant, other, like the Sales Academy and things like that. I only have really like 2 last things to say. So one thing that I noticed here was this table styling. If we go to inspect, we can verify. You can see the sort of like table HTML tags in the rows and the columns and things like that. So technically, tables are a deprecated HTML element. And so what is better is to use divs, or oftentimes at the Blogsmith, if there's a case for having a table, then we'll just create a custom graphic for it. It's hard to say if using a deprecated element like a table is something that would negatively impact your SEO, but just the fact that it's deprecated to me means that you should try to avoid it in general. This isn't like super common knowledge. This is just something that's come up really across like the intersection of me working on content, me like operating in SEO, and then me having a background as a web designer. So I don't think a lot of people necessarily know that, but I did want to make that that point here, and we do have something in the Blogsmith style guide, our process for like how we create graphics around them, but that's basically in reference to the fact that we just don't want to use the table tags. Okay, last thing that I will say about this one for today is that I noticed that all of the articles have these like built-in CTA buttons. So you can get a demo, you know, kind of like interact with sales, or you could sign up for free, DIY, self-serve. It's just kind of matter of fact. I kind of love it. I don't know that I've seen other brands just sort of like blatantly add that to the bottom of every article. I have seen them certainly having like one button maybe where it's like, sign up for emails, sign up for an account, or get a demo. But to have them both together, it seems so simple, but it's like novel to me because I just haven't seen that. I guess the last comment is I always have to comment on the scrolling marquees because they're just goofy. Do they work? I don't know, but they have definitely been the subject of ridicule in the past. When it comes to web design and, you know, even before the 2020s. So, yeah, I think that's what I've got for you today. I really love Apollo's content. I think they are absolutely killing it. I love their tool. And, yeah, it's just a good resource for creating, you know, good content of your own, and especially like if you're representing a certain brand or tool and want to weave it in, I think that their content does a really great job of that. So hope everybody has a good day, as good as they can, with however they feel about how the selection turned out. All right, bye everyone.